Our next session is the exclusive book launch here of the book Portuguese Seaports of Goa, Chaul and Vasai by Amita Kanekar. And the book launch will be accompanied by a discussion. Amita Kanekar and Michell in conversation with Vishwesh, Kandolkar. The dais is yours. Please introduce yourself.
Thank you so much. I am Vishwesh Kandolkar. I teach at Architecture College. And with me today we have Amita Kanekar, who has written this book. And we also have Michell, who is part of Heritage Foundation, as much as he's written many books on similar topics, similar types. Not Goa. What I will do is allow George to speak very briefly about this type of book and just show you around so that we can have a little more engaged discussion. George, would you just like to talk about the book?
Good morning, everybody. This is the book. Very gorgeous. It is too. Authored by Amita here, and with photography by Surendra Kumar, who's sitting there. And this is one of a series of books that my foundation, called the Deccan Heritage Foundation, has sponsored and published in the belief that there is a need for books for a general audience which are full of reliable, professional information about historical sites with lots of seductive photography, because many of these places are not really very well known. And this type of book bridges the gap between, if you like, popular magazine literature and academic studies. And we find that there is an audience for these books, and once people have picked up a book and seen a picture of a fort that they've never heard about, they might say, well, why don't we go and visit this place and learn about it? And maybe that will lead to an appreciation of a site that has been overlooked, and maybe to some measures to protect the site, and so that it endures into the future. I have to be grateful to Amita, who responded very positively when we first approached her to author such a book, because she is from Goa, she is an architectural historian, and she first said, well, she doesn't know anything about the forts. I said, well, why don't you find out? You could be a researcher. And she did. So she did an excellent job. We had wonderful photography, and we also decided that we should have maps, so that when any of you go there, you have a sort of little graphic, you can know how the whole thing is laid out, where are the chief features. So we are treating the readers with respect, that when you go to these places, you want to learn something. You don't want to learn too much, because it's hot and you're thirsty, of course. So we want to make it attractive, so that when you go, you see lovely pictures like this. And if you want to learn more, Amita has given in the back of the book further reading. You can learn more about this book. And we're very thrilled, because this is the first book that our foundation has sponsored to do with this part of the Deccan. We have done books on Aurangabad, on Badami, on Hampi, on Hyderabad, and we're planning a book on the Jewish heritage, and maybe one on Buddhist heritage. So this is part of a bigger series of such books. I think the size is very good, and the price is extremely good. So instead of 495 rupees, you can rush out now, don't stampede, for 400 rupees you can buy this book. So I think it's fantastic value, and we are absolutely thrilled that the book has come out, and that the photographer and myself can be with Amita and Vishwesh to have the copies ready for you today. So just go easy on the book table over there, and today you'll get a very good price. Thank you.
I want to talk a little bit about guidebooks, and sometimes guidebooks are literally maps showing you location of pictures. But what Amita does here is brings in a little bit more, a little more history, which is not necessarily clear in the guidebooks or the popular websites. And this is where I think so the faithful documentation, which kind of highlights the historical narratives of this place or the monuments comes out. And as you said, it is bridging the gap. In your previous experience, you found that such kind of documentations helped to make a case with the authorities who don't recognize it otherwise?
Well, we don't, we start with the general public. We have people who say, if it wasn't for your guidebook, we would never have gone round the corner and found this or that, or gone to this place. This is the beginning. From there, maybe the authorities will decide. In fact, there are quite a lot of authorities involved in, I think, protecting these sites. They are not unprotected, but let's say they are unvisited and unappreciated. And this is where the general public has a role to play in this country, in every country. You, as a public, to visit these sites and then to say to the authorities, why have you let the weeds grow, why don't you do this? You have to get involved. It's your heritage after all. The authority has to know that you are interested. And I think these books have a role to play. They don't substitute for heavy-duty, great scholarship. This is not an encyclopedia of every fortified site on the Konkan coast and Goa. This is another sort of study. But this will, I think, appeal and is written to appeal to a general readership. And Amita has to be congratulated because she has compressed the essential historical information for each of the sites and the essential architectural features, so you know what is important and unique to each of these sites. So when you go there, you'll start to understand what is this military architecture, what is this intervention of European Portuguese type of buildings within an Indian context. So it is something new and innovative.
I'd like to bring in Amita here. Writing a straightforward, sometimes historical books can be quite daunting, especially when you want to write a bland history. What I've seen in the book is that you've peppered the book with little anecdotes or little features about Portuguese history as well. How did you find this job of writing about historical facts or events versus trying to put in peppering with history, etc.?
It was a challenge because the book format was laid out because it belongs to a series, and so one had to balance the history, the architecture, and the way the forts are today. So I wrote a lot, I think, and George is very good at cutting down stuff. So this is the result of both of our efforts is what you see now. But all of these three aspects were fascinating, actually. I mean, the history is just amazing. These forts were unique, not just for their architecture of the time, because they introduced the European style of the gunpowder fort to South Asia. Before that, you have the medieval forts, which were designed for a different kind of weaponry. But when the Portuguese arrived in South Asia, this is the time when weaponry is changing. So they begin with a medieval kind of fort, and then in just about 20 years, in 25 years, they're pulling it down, they're building a different kind of fort, which is designed for cannon. They had cannon when they arrived, but it was not so much used. So they bring in what we call the Trace Italian style. It was a kind of design that was pioneered in Italy with angular bastions, low walls, merlons and embrasures for cannon. So it was designed for gunpowder and for artillery. So in their architecture, these forts are unique, and you can see that most of you must have visited Aguada, and you can see that's a fantastic example of 17th century fort design anywhere in the world, and also preserved in pretty good condition. But besides that, these forts are very integrated into the politics of the time and the politics of today. That's amazing, At the time, they were centers for controlling the seas, of course, because the Portuguese Empire, as you probably know, was a littoral-based empire. They were not. Albuquerque is supposed to have told one of the rulers of the Malabar that our forts are not to grab your land. Our forts are just to protect our goods and our people. So they were not interested in conquering territory. They were interested in controlling the trade on the seas. That was their aim, and they had this whole string of forts, around Africa, West Asia, South Asia, and Southeast Asia, and of course they started to lose them in the 17th century, but the 16th century is the time of the Estado de India. The empire is built, and it's based on these forts and their control of the seas. But besides that, there were storehouses for goods. They were centers of evangelization. They were centers of Catholicism. They were centers of slavery. I mean, the Portuguese are the ones who globalized slavery, unfortunately, and you have a huge number of people from all over the world. Slavery was around before, but it tended to be localized. In India, we know that slavery was deeply connected to the caste system, but the Portuguese are the ones who globalized it, and you have an enormous number of people from all kinds of places at these forts. You had employment to all kinds of people in the troops, because the Portuguese were always a minority in in their imperial adventure. So they employed people from all over the world. So these forts were centers of a very heterogeneous culture, which you can still see today. You know, if you look at the communities near the forts, around the forts, you find a very unique kind of heterogeneous Luso-Arabic, South Asian, East Asian kind of culture, East African, which is still, you know, can be still found today. You have languages which are mixes, you know, like you have a Portuguese Creole, which is found near the Korlai fort, and which is dying out now. But it's still there. It's still there. So they were unique for their, and they also were integrated into those communities. In most of these forts, you find that the fort is standing there, but it's defending itself from sea attack and from land attack. Of course, they were also defended themselves from land attack, but they were worried about the people who had owned these sites before and might want them back. But they were integrated into the local community a lot, and they are even more so today. And I mean, I just want to make this point also, that when I went around and saw these forts and of course, let me interrupt by saying I'm really grateful for this project, because it was a huge educative experience. I also met with a lot of people who stay near the forts even today, and their experiences of the upkeep, the maintenance, the usage, because these forts even today have, for example, churches and chapels that are very much in use. Many of the forts have got within them the parish churches of their area, and the local communities are very familiar with the forts, and they contribute to the upkeep of them, and that's something really important. And so we can't see these heritage sites as separate from the whole area, the culture and the area of the local region. I just happened to be at, if I can just go on, I happened to be at Tirukkal yesterday, and Tirukkal the Tirukkal fort, in fact I was showing it to some students from Delhi. And as many of you might know, Tirukkal is in the heart of a storm at the moment, because the local village is fighting against a monstrous golf course in the area.
And it's just a small part.
Yeah.
So what Amita does is that, apart from telling you the straightforward what the fort is and how is the architecture of the fort in terms of its engineering, dealing with these changes, like for example the cannon which is coming, she also starts putting these small inserts of contemporary politics. So here she says about Tirukkal village, she says that at the foot of the hill is a small Catholic community of Munkas, people with a traditional right to the till land belonging to a bhatkar. Today, most people here live off fishing, feni production, rice and coconut cultivation, or jobs across the river. The houses have crosses marking the entrances, sloping tile roofs, and yard full of big and old trees, and sometimes boat. There are coconut groves in between, and cashew trees on the hill around, whose fruit is used for the production of urrak and feni. The peaceful, almost sleepy appearance is, however, deceptive. The village has been embroiled for some years now in a struggle to stop the conversion of its land into a golf course for upmarket tourism. Now this reading is useful because what it does is that at once it puts the history of forts into contemporary politics, and one is able to then discuss some of these things into present times. So, and this and many more which comes in, but even otherwise, sometimes when you make these books, which is straightforward books, which is supposed to be a popular book where you go and say, okay, 1733, all right, I can see it and I can see the fort and I can read the thing. But then the moment you pepper it with some kind of thing, then you immediately start appreciating also what is happening around. So they don't become monuments in isolation in history, but they're also part of the contemporary politics.
In fact, the villagers, I'm glad you interrupted me, I could have gone on forever. I'll just tell you this, that the villagers at Tirukkal said that they had a plan themselves for local tourism. They said they want to start off eco-cum heritage tourism venture, because they're intending to end the golf course project. They're very positive about it. They said, no, it's going to go. Whether it takes 1 year or it takes 10 years, they're going to fight it out. And when it goes, they're going to start, they said they're going to start a local tourism venture, which will include the fort and the church in the fort, and also their village, and also their cashew plantations and their culture. And they're going to take people around and make them, make people live in their village and also eat the local food, and so experience the entire culture of the place, which includes its built heritage. And I thought that was really wonderful. That's the kind of tourism that Goa needs really something that is based in the local community, that the local community benefits from, and it's not aiming to fossilize the community. That doesn't mean we want to keep the traditions the way they are. No, this in fact the local community is one that is very that is developing, that is connected to many parts of the world and other parts of Goa. It's not an age-old community. In fact, they were saying that they have given up their old professions and they're doing many other things. They've given up their old traditional professions of toddy tapping and so on, and they're very much in the modern world. But this is the kind of tourism that I would like to see around these forts, because these forts are magnificent heritage sites, but we can't see them in isolation. We can't see them as, as the government apparently wants to see them as one huge luxury golf course and one lovely little bit of heritage stuck on one corner. It can't be like that. It has to be part of a living, growing, advancing tradition of communities, developing in Goa. This is what I think is very important.
We'll just take a little opportunity to discuss a little bit about fort as a monument, because what the fort really is a great architecture of a wall which is made to defend. And sometimes this wall is enclosed in a very small area, which makes it a very only meant for defense, but at times it goes to do a little more. For example, some of the forts were having factories inside. And apart from defense, it also starts having small buildings which houses many buildings and institutions. So we have forts which are pure defense, we have forts which are having collection of buildings, and we also have city forts like Chaul and Vasai. And of course Old Goa, which is not featured here because it is extensively documented elsewhere. So I want to talk about one small passage when you say that what were these forts for, and many times the popular imaginary is that they were trying to defend against the sea, etc. But again, there is a small line here which says that the fort of Chapora, for instance, it is quite a large fort in terms of its footprint. And what the fort does historically is that it enclosed a large area within, for it was intended not only for the defense of the mouth of the river and to prevent raids by Marathas, but also as a place of refuge for villagers during such attacks. Now, this is something which is not, again, goes against the grain, that the attacks were somewhere external, the enemy somewhere external. But here is this Chapora fort doing exactly that. It is not just defending itself, the so-called Luso descendants, but also protecting the villagers who are asking the support of this forts. So the forts are not just simply monuments of defense to some people within, but also villages around it. So you would like to just speak about that.
Thanks for bringing that up. That's a good point, because it also counters this popular narrative today, which at least is found in school textbooks of the Portuguese being, kind of outsiders, and the whole era being a negative one. I mean, this is what we hear in Goa quite a lot. But it just shows how the forts, and these are military, these are institutions of military and power, but they were integrated into the community even then. And as Vishwesh pointed out, yes, there are stories of how people used to flee. The villagers used to flee to the Chapora and even some of the other forts. But Chapora was on the Kolwale River, and that was a place where a lot of sudden attacks took place from the north, from the Marathas. So people used to flee there, and they were given shelter there, to the extent that for 2 years in the beginning of the 18th century, the fort was taken by the Marathas. And apparently the locals forced, 2 years down the line, they forced the Marathas out, and that's how the Portuguese got it back. So, it also shows that there was a certain sense of belonging. I mean, the fort seemed to belong to the local people. This is very interesting. This incident about the locals rising against the Maratha holding of the fort it's not in the book, but I found such interesting stuff. It shows that the forts were not against the people. The forts were part of the local community, and like I said, they had institutions within which the people used, and the people were employed in. And some of them and many of them still have, and the ones that are functioning well still have locals employed in them.
Since we're talking about locals, now we need to talk about a little bit of Portuguese, because we say Portuguese forts. And sometimes there's a myth that these Portuguese are some kind of white, Lusophonic people who are coming down in the forts, and they're the ones who are controlling everything. But it's very interesting, and it requires a little more deliberation when you say that the Estado, but the Portuguese themselves were never more than a small minority in the Estado enterprise, even in Goa. The rest of those who manned their ships, populated their towns, and fought in their armadas and militia, whether free or enslaved, might be part of Portuguese, local Catholics, local non-Catholics, Deccanese, Bengalis, or East Africans, along with smattering of Frenchmen, Italians, Arabs, East Asians, and others of mixed backgrounds. The Estado was thus, from its very inception, a cultural hybrid, something still visible in the Luso-Arabic, East African, Asian traditions of the Roman Catholic communities living near the forts today. So, essentially, Estado was not necessarily about a particular idea of this so-called colonial who are outside, and they were also about this, this large collection of people from different cultures making it. And this is something which requires to be told, and probably more strongly, which has been said about it. You want to add something?
Yeah, I mean, this is, I think, I don't know that much about the communities, but I've sensed it, I've experienced it while visiting these forts so many times, all the way up to Diu. I mean, I visited forts, we surveyed a lot of forts, and this is true of many of the settlements around them. They're really interesting. They have their own history. They have communities that have a unique history and a memory of traveling, great distances, and it would be really nice if we could find out more and we could document these cultures, or or celebrate these cultures or whatever in some way. Because I don't know that much about it. I know, for example, in Vasai, it's amazing how interesting that the settlement, the Kolivada settlement near the fort is. It's I mean, most of these settlements, in fact, have got these. They have a very cosmopolitan. They have even the music that you hear is semi-Arabic, semi-African. It's really unique. It's really nice. The food is very interesting. So I don't know enough about it. I would like to know more, and I hope I do learn more.
The forts, the Portuguese forts especially, were not necessarily about Goa or some parts of it. They actually had a large empire, and it is very clear that the seaborne trade. They wanted to control the seaborne trade more than just the land. They were never interested too much to come in the interiors of the land. Which means the whole connection, if you start looking at the Indian Ocean, there you have to look at the entire necklace right down and probably a little further. And this was a chain of small forts which are protecting the whole thing. So they were actually controlling a large sea trade. And many times it so happens that we are unable to see how big this empire was, simply because we find that today their dots are very small. And therefore the idea that Goa is a location, as a very small place today in terms of size, but Goa was not a small place, as probably Jason would say, and that kind of links this whole thing about what is this empire about.
Actually, they were along the coast, but from the coast they influenced things hugely inland. I mean, within 10 or 15, I mean, not even, I think maybe within 2 years of the famous Battle of Chaul, in which the Egyptians and the Venetians and the Gujarat Sultanate defeated the Portuguese and captured some of their ships. Within 2 years of that, you find Portuguese-style munitions all over the place, So much so that when the Portuguese captured Goa, they found this Bijapuri arsenal, a large Bijapuri arsenal in Goa, because Goa was apparently famous for its production of weapons for about 2 decades before the Portuguese took Goa. But they found their own guns there. They said, these are, so many, because they were captured from the ships, and then they found other guns which were manufactured on those lines. So, the military warfare changed, fortifications of course changed, food cultures we know change. I mean, a lot of the stuff we eat now are thanks to the Portuguese bringing them in, and these were the places where a lot of this landed. I mean, the basic foods that we eat like potatoes and chilies and tomatoes and so on came via the Portuguese. So the Portuguese Empire, although it was littoral based, it influenced and transformed cultures inland to a huge extent. I mean, Bijapur modeled itself, in many ways on the Portuguese, and that's the reason why it could take the leadership in the Sultanate struggle against Vijayanagara, which was relatively still wedded to old methods of military warfare. I mean, they still use these cavalry battalions at the time, even though they had guns, but they didn't give priority to the guns, and to some extent they were also close to the Portuguese, and the result is that they kind of relied on the Portuguese troops sometimes, but they didn't change their own fortifications. Vijayanagara did not have cannon, embrasures and merlons in their forts, but Bijapur actually learned from the Portuguese and became the dominant power in the Deccan at that time. So yeah, there was this huge. So even though they were on the coast, their influence was gigantic. I mean, we know that they influenced the Mughals as well, who came a little later. So the Mughal Empire owes a lot to, they owes a lot of their knowledge of what is happening in Europe to the Portuguese.
This brings us to the evolution of forts itself. So around the 14th century is the way the art of warfare changes into using cannons or the black powder, and that changes the fort. So were the Portuguese the first to use cannon, or what you were saying the other day that there were others?
There's an argument on this. So there are some scholars who feel that the Portuguese were the first who brought in artillery into South Asia, and there were some who say that 10 years or 20 years, 1460s or so, you seem to see cannon holes in the fortifications of Bijapuri forts in Raichur, in Belgaum. So it's possible that artillery was already being used in the Deccan Sultanate because of their connections to Egypt and so on. They were very deeply commercially tied to Egypt, and Egypt was manufacturing advanced gunpowder. So yes, this Deccan area was where it seems to have begun in a big way, the use of gunpowder. And whether it's the Portuguese or the Deccan Sultanates, it was within a few years of each other at the end of the 15th century. And yeah, it transformed military warfare, transformed the design of ships. It made a big difference too.
I'd like to turn to George. George, in terms of the fort designs in the Deccan, other places, is there any specific architecture or larger, or there's which you see in the evolution of forts which can connect to this, which these forts in Portuguese, or how they're different or similar? Or
Amita mentioned the adaptations of Deccan fortresses to this gunpowder technology, but this geometric type of European designs we find here did not seem to go into the Deccan. So they really kept traditional elliptical, circular type forts in which they have buttresses and emplacements for guns. So it's quite interesting how they learnt on the details and the guns, and throughout the Deccan we find Portuguese cannon, even Dutch cannon, many of which were connected with Anatolia and the Turkish, Egyptian gun foundries, which were very advanced in this technology. So I think the point is that these forts form part of a larger subject, both geographically, military, technologically, culturally, and it's something that you have very specially here in Goa and further up the coast, north and south of Mumbai, and of course in Gujarat. And the idea about such a book is that we should showcase these things so that many of you who may have visited them but didn't know what you were looking at or how to look at. This is the problem, that with Amita's expert guidance, her text, and lovely photographs and hopefully usable maps, you will start to understand what these forts really are, and therefore help guarantee their preservation into the future, into whatever cultural spectrum is most suitable. And this is the point, because this is something very special and very much part of a global Portuguese military world. If you go to Macau or Malacca, you will also learn about it. But here we have the best. The best. Wow. So I should really thank you, Vishwesh, for chairing this, and thank the organization for allowing us to have this session to promote the book, copies of which arrived just, at the last moment, so it's very fresh off the printer, and I'm delighted that I could also manage to be in Goa at the time. So thank you.
just take Hello. Yeah, so essentially if you look at the plan of the fort, you can see that there are geometric designs which are very similar to the designs which are there in Europe. So rather than just being an enclosure around the area, these are specific designs which are coming. So the forts here are very unique in terms of history, which George mentioned, which is not there in other parts of Deccan. I would like, probably now what we'll do is just maybe we take one or two questions if you'd like to ask some questions.
I'm picking up the book. But before that, how far south have you gone?
we've begun from the south with Kavadaram. The thing is that the Portuguese built forts all along, right down to the south, the southern tip of Kerala, and in fact all along the other side, along the other. Yeah, on the eastern coast as well. But they were modified later on. So what we have taken are the forts that are still remain in their, say, their 17th century, early 17th century architecture. The Dutch and then later the British and then also Mysore and the Marathas have modified some forts, or they have disintegrated badly. So we've taken the forts from Goa to the region of Bombay, which are relatively still Portuguese in their architecture. They're still in their original architecture. And the ones that are accessible also. So, because for example, the Thana Fort, which is near Bombay, is relatively in its original state, but it's been used as a state prison for a long time, and they don't allow people to visit it. And they have made some minor modifications from the point of imprisonment. So we've included the ones which can be visited and which are in close to their original architecture.
Just one more thing.
This.
How do the Kadamba King figure in this? Because I did come across a fort which was originally built by the Kerala king and later on modified by the Kadamba king. There's no story after that.
Most of the sites, in fact, most of the sites that you find Portuguese forts on are in fact earlier sites. They predate the Portuguese. So in Goa, for example, except for Aguad and Mormugao, are the only two forts that were built from scratch. All the other forts are built on pre-existing fortifications. So by either local chiefs or by the Keledi Nayakas in the south of Goa or by Bijapur. Most of them were transformed by Bijapur, because fortification along the Arabian Sea coast goes back more than 1,000 years. Also because the nature of the coast allows fortifications on those headlands. You have a lot of cliffs along the coast, so there are excellent vantage points to actually keep an eye on riverine as well as coastal traffic. So there were always fortifications there, but the Portuguese transformed them. Even the forts that they conquered as late as, like Tiracol or like Shapora, they conquered them in the 18th century. They tore them down and they built completely new fortifications there, which were suitable to the current ways of fighting. So yeah, they are Portuguese forts now, but they are sometimes built on old fortifications. That's the case. So in that sense, they are connected.
Okay, thank you so much.